So today I've got a point to make about literacy. Something that I often see among history enthusiasts is this sort of sentiment that it's a real shame that those Indians weren't literate, because it would be really nice to have some indigenous perspectives rather than just having to rely on all of these white folks all the time. The sentiment behind this expression is coming from a decent place, but again, it's another manifestation of the broken Indian model that I've talked about before. This is a problem with those Indians, and so on, so on, so on. So first off, a lot of us did have a writing system. It might not be like a very sophisticated writing system, but a lot of people had a writing system. So Iroquoian people, we got pictograph writing. A lot of people in the northeastern woodlands had some form of pictograph writing. A pictograph writing, it's really limited. You can't sort of convey the specific words of a sentence. So there's no poetry to language, there's no like literature to it or whatever. But you could convey sort of the basic events of a day, of an expedition. What I think it would be I think it was mostly used for like record keeping and stuff like that. Now, record keeping is maybe not very exciting, but it is invaluable to the historian. Now, as I've talked about pictograph writing previously, most people don't know about pictograph writing because almost none of it has survived to the present day. People use the pictograph writing on the walls of their house or posts in the house or whatever. Or they write on birch bark or whatever, or they write on oak trees outside. Houses get burned down, birch bark scrolls, you need to take care of them. And oak trees, they got cut down for firewood and lumber a long time ago, once the area was clear cut. The long and the short of it is that only like a handful of scraps of this pictograph writing have survived, not enough for anybody to actually do anything useful with. I've started to make my point there. The pre-contact Maya were a literate people. They had a writing system, they had a tradition of making books. These were a people who numbered in the millions. This wasn't some little group of 5,000, 10,000, 30,000 people. There were millions of Maya prior to contact, and they were literate. And do you know how many of these Maya books survived to be studied by archaeologists, anthropologists, etc.? 3.5. 3.5 of these books survived out of God knows how many. So how many pre-contact Maya books were there? Well, there were millions of Maya prior to contact, and they'd had this writing system for something like 1,500 years, maybe more, I don't remember. We know that Buddy What's-His-Name, Grand Inquisitor or whatever, he came in and he burned 37 of these books, or whatever the number is, something like that. So we know that there were at least 37 of these books in existence. Don't you think that there were probably a few more than 37? You find a painting by some artist, a high quality painting by some artist in the 1800s or whatever, and this is the only painting that you can find attributed to his name. Is that the only painting he did? Absolutely bloody not. You don't get to a certain level of artistry without having produced a lot of art before that one. So somebody writing a book, a scribe writing out a book, if the calligraphy is at all passable, that scribe has produced a lot of books prior to that point. So I refuse to believe that there were only ever 37 or 40 Maya books in existence. There were probably hundreds, maybe thousands, throughout all of that 1,000 years of Maya literacy prior to contact. And of those hundreds, possibly thousands, 3.5 of them have survived. So we go back to Iroquoian territory with our 3 or 4 scraps of pictograph writing that have survived. The Haudenosaunee, as a people, were made refugee on 2 occasions that I know of. The Mohawk people, as a people, were made refugee on a couple more occasions than that. Now, when you're made refugee, you can only take you're limited in what you can carry along. So you're going to take your bare necessities. Okay, I'm going to need my bow, and I'm going to need my axe, and I'm going to need an extra set of clothes, and I'm going to need some blankets, and maybe a cook pot or whatever. The early days, you're going to be limited by what you can carry, what you can strap to your dogs. Later days, you might have a horse or a cow. Regardless, you're going to be very limited in what you can bring along with you. A big portion of that carry weight that you're going to bring along with you is going to be food and stuff. So if you're going to feed yourself on corn alone, you need like 20 or 30 corn cobs a day, depending on how much physical activity you're doing. That's a lot of corn that you need in order to just survive. So a lot of the carry weight, a lot of your potential carry weight is going to be taken up by just food. Again, if you're one or two people going refugee throughout the wilderness, you can sustain yourself maybe by hunting and fishing. But if you're a group of hundreds or thousands, that's a lot of deer that you need every day if you're going to exist on that alone. So you're going to be limited in terms of what you take along. Besides the essentials, you might take a couple of treasures. Here's some silver bracelets or whatever. We might be able to barter with these later on. Here's a wampum belt that my grandfather gave grandmother to symbolize their marriage or whatever. You might not be so bothered about those birch bark scrolls that talk about how many deer your village killed in the last 6 months. Are you really going to take those along in a life or death situation? Like, okay, yeah, a birch bark scroll doesn't weigh very much, but it doesn't weigh nothing, doesn't take up no space, and so on, so on, so on, so on, so on. So we go back to the Maya. They were not made refugee as a people on any occasion. There was never an occasion where the entirety of the Maya population had to uproot and go somewhere else because every Maya village had been burned down at the same time. There was no event in which every single Maya village was burned at the same time. Going back to the older point, the point that sort of raised this, oh man, it's a shame that those Indians weren't literate, because I would have really liked to have had their perspective. Even if we were properly literate, like writing something as sophisticated as the Latin script, we were writing out books the equivalent of Shakespeare or whatever, even if that were the case, there probably wouldn't be much, if anything, that survived. The issue isn't, oh, it's a shame that these Indians weren't literate. The issue is, it's a shame that colonialism happened. The onus isn't on the Maya for not having preserved their books better when the Inquisitors going around collecting people and burning them and burning all their artifacts and stuff like that. That's not a Maya problem, that's a colonial Spain problem. And going back up to Canada, the problem isn't us up here that we weren't producing great enough artwork or whatever. The problem is that Sullivan came in and burned every one of our villages, and so on, so on, so on, so on, so on. The broken Indian model sticks its nose into all aspects of how people think about Indigenous people. So to sort of better exemplify that point I was trying to make, imagine that you in the here and now are forced to flee your house, and the only things you can take with you are the stuff you can carry on your back. Your car doesn't factor into this. There's been some sort of technological catastrophe that's meant that cars and stuff don't work anymore. So you've only got what you can load into your backpack, and everything else is going to be destroyed tomorrow. Are you going to take the complete works of William Shakespeare? Are you going to take all of that stack of every diary you've had since you were 4? You're really going to take that along with you? Let's suppose that your city is going to be struck by a meteor tomorrow and obliterated. And everybody in that city, they're in the same predicament as you. They got to evacuate by tomorrow, and cars and stuff don't factor into it. How many books do you think people are going to bring along in that endeavor? How many of those people in your city are going to bring along a copy of the complete works of William Shakespeare? Now let's imagine that every city you know about in your sort of semi-region is under the same predicament. They're all going to be wiped out by comets in the next 24 hours. Everybody in every city in southwestern Ontario, possibly the rest of the known world, you don't really know, has to evacuate and can only take the stuff that they've got on their backs. How many books are people going to bring? You think about like, you ever gone sort of backcountry camping? A lot of weight just gets taken up with kind of unavoidable stuff. Like once you got a change of clothes and your tent, there's not a ton of space, much less weight left over. How many books are you going to bring? So everybody brings their favorite book. How many of those books are just going to be Bibles? How many of those books are just going to be The Lord of the Rings or whatever? Do you really think very many people are going to drag along their copy of, I don't know, some indie author that you never heard of or whatever? How many people are going to bring along their tax forms and stuff like that? The annual archaeological report of the Royal Ontario Museum. How many people are going to bring along copies of that? Put yourself in that sort of situation, and that's what a lot of Indigenous people have dealt with. So, like, even if we'd had a great, wonderful writing system, every bit as sophisticated as Latin, there wouldn't be very much that survives, if anything. Look at the Maya. Millions of people writing books for over 1,000 years, and we got 3.5. And what do you think of 30,000 people? How many books do you think 30,000 people would have survive? Anyway, that's all that I have to say about that.